Hello everybody, and thank you so much for joining us tonight for the second in New Jersey Audubon's storytelling series, That's Wild, Tales from the Human Side of Nature. My name is Mike Skargeland, and I'll be your host for this evening. It's great to have you with us. So let me remind you, what is That's Wild? Well, it's a storytelling event in which people from all walks of life tell their tales of interacting with and being affected by nature. In other words, how wildlife and the wild spaces outside of us connect with the spaces inside our minds. The stories we showcase can be comic, sad, small, epic. They can be all of those things all wrapped up together. But what they all are is true. They're authentic to the storyteller. And as a result, they have great meaning for that storyteller. And we hope, therefore, that they'll have great meaning for you, the audience. And speaking of the audience, here's a reminder of how you, watching at home, can get involved with the show tonight. At the bottom of your Zoom screen, there is a little box that says Q&A. And if you want to ask our storyteller a question at any time during the story, you can click on that little button. A dialog box will open up. You can write a question, send it off, and it'll be reviewed and possibly selected to be asked during the question and answer session at the end of the story. So by all means, feel free to ask questions that way. The other thing you should know tonight is that the chat function in Zoom has been disabled, and also that this evening's performance or show is going to be recorded for later use on njaudubon.org, which is of course New Jersey Audubon's website, and also New Jersey Audubon's YouTube channel. So just please be aware of that. Right, I think it's time now to introduce our storyteller. Our tale teller tonight is 16 years old, and she has been interested in birding since she was 5 years old. She's a member of New Jersey Audubon's Young Birders Club, and she loves all things outdoors, including fishing, herping, and mothing. We're going to come back to that, I think. She also has a special interest in photography and videography and hopes to pursue that in college. And given that she's only 16, that's actually not that far away. You know, the college world starts not that far away. So that'll be interesting. She's going to be telling her story in a series of 3 related stories tonight, collectively called Growing Up in Birding and Nature. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our That's Wild tale teller tonight, Emma Price.
Hey everyone, I'm Emma. I'm 16 years old, and I've been interested in nature for pretty much my whole life. In addition to birding, like Mike had mentioned, I love photography, vlogging, fishing, herping, and recently started mothing too. I also have a special love for cats, which you'll soon see. The way that I got started in birding is actually kind of unusual. I had just turned 5, and my family had also just brought in a stray cat that I named Marie. Being that she was a stray cat, she was largely nocturnal, and the problem with that is she would meow and keep us up at night. My mom had this idea to try putting out food for the birds so that Marie would be watching the birds, occupied and be awake during the day, and hopefully would sleep at night. The funny thing is I liked watching the birds too, so Marie and I would watch the birds together. As I was starting to get more interested in the birds, my mom took me to the Plainsboro Preserve, where we used to go for little nature outings. Like I said, I've kind of always been interested in nature before I got into birding and everything. And she got me a field guide. And I still remember the first 2 birds that I ever identified. The first one my mom helped me with, and that was the dark-eyed junco. And the second one, the first one that I identified completely on my own, was a Carolina chickadee. I found them so interesting that I used to take my mom's little point-and-shoot camera and take pictures of them. Little did I know at this time that this was the beginning of 2 of my greatest passions, birding and photography, and that it would lead me to everything, all the adventures and experiences that I've been able to go on. Now I'm going to share with you 3 short stories how I've grown up in birding and nature. Flash forward a few years, I spent more time birding and had even taken a trip down to Cape May for the fall festival. I was really starting to get more into it. I was about 10 now, and it was spring migration. I had gotten the honor of going on a field trip to Central Park in the middle of New York City with Pete Dunn as a group's leader. For those of you who don't know, Pete Dunn is a very famous and well-known birder and author from New Jersey. Anyway, so I was walking along with Pete Dunn, and one thing that I've done throughout my time as a birder is I tend to get obsessed with a bird that I've never seen before, and then just try to plan out how I want to see it. So as I was walking along with Pete, I was asking him where he thought I might be able to find my current goal bird at this time. I forgot, I should have mentioned that earlier, was prothonotary warbler. So I was asking him where he thought I might be able to find a prothonotary warbler. And he was telling me a bunch of different spots that were really reliable and that would work for one. And so we're walking along, and all of a sudden, this little yellow bird jumps out right in the middle of the trail. And it was so close and bright that it actually startled me. And I just remember thinking, oh, wow, is that a prothonotary warbler? And Pete just looked at me and confirmed what I was thinking when he said, or you could just look at that one right there. And to this day, this is still one of my favorite and one of my most memorable birding experiences that I've ever had. And this showed one of the many reasons why I love birding is how things can be so unexpected. I always love all the fun surprises. The next story takes place a few years later. I'm now 14. The way that it worked out when I first joined the New Jersey Young Birders Club is I was the youngest and also the least experienced. Just as a little side note, what the New Jersey Young Birders Club is a club of young birders ages 11 through 17. And pre-COVID, we'd meet up at least once a month for a birding field trip that was led by a New Jersey Audubon leader. Anyway, this story is kind of about, I feel like, a turning point where I feel like I became more of an advanced birder as opposed to just a beginner. As I mentioned in my last story, I tend to come up with some sort of gold bird. This year it was owls, particularly northern saw-whet owls and long-eared owls. My friends were home from college on winter break, and one of my friends had just found a long-eared owl. So we decided, we were all planning, that we were going to go meet up and bird somewhere. Since my friends were away and I hadn't seen them for a while, we were just going to go all meet up. And we decided to all go owling. So one afternoon we all went out, and it had just snowed that morning. So everything was covered in snow, and all these evergreens where we were looking for the owls were all covered in snow, and it was really beautiful out. And we had just gotten to one of the first cedar groves where we were going to be looking for owls. And to be honest, I was kind of waiting for my friends to find the owls because I had never been owling before, and I didn't even really know quite how to go about doing that. So I was just waiting for them. And as I was waiting, I was standing underneath this cedar tree, and I happened to look up, and there was this little pile of feathers at the top of this tree. And I just remember looking up and going like, because at the top of that tree was a northern saw-whet owl. And I feel like this was a turning point in that I feel like my friends started to take me more seriously as a birder, and I also started to take myself more seriously as a birder as well, because northern saw-whet owls are notorious for being pretty hard to find and camouflaging themselves really well. And even if you know exactly where they are, they can still be hard to find. My friends were looking in the right spot, but they were still having some trouble seeing it. They did all eventually get on it, but they can hide themselves really well. And yeah, so usually I felt like it would be my friends and other birders who would find this stuff. And sometimes what makes these experiences so I feel like part of the way I was able to find it was luck, and also the fact that I'm so much shorter than all my friends. I was able to get just the right view looking up the trees. But I feel like part of what makes certain experiences in birding so awesome is not just getting the bird, but where you are and who you're with. And I kind of had mentioned that in my last story with Pete Dunn, that I was with this famous birder in Central Park getting one of my gold birds. And this was similar. I was with friends who I hadn't seen in a while in these cedars in the snow, which I love snow, and getting to see a gold bird. And that's one of the reasons why I love photography and vlogging, because I feel like it allows me to take in everything, not just focusing on the bird, but focusing on the whole experience. And that's another thing that I love about birding. One of my final story that I'm going to be telling is one of my most recent adventures, and this is also the most extreme adventure that I'm going to be mentioning here. This one takes place just this past winter. I've always loved pelagics and the whole idea of them. What a pelagic is a boat that goes out miles and miles into the ocean to look for the pelagic species. And what the pelagic species are birds that spend pretty much their whole entire lives out at sea, far out in the sea, and only come to shore to breed. And even when they come to shore to breed, most times they breed on remote islands. I first got interested in them when this photographer who we'd run into from time to time and would show me pictures had showed me a picture of a razorbill. And I immediately became interested in them. Razorbills to me, they almost look like a little penguin. And since that time, I had started to, study them and read about them and slowly became obsessed with all pelagic birds. My mom always said that when I turned 15, I was old enough and could go on a short 8-hour pelagic trip. And while 8 hours might not seem like such a short trip, for a pelagic, that's pretty short because most pelagics will go out for 18 plus hours. So this was kind of like a starter kind of trip. So I was excited. I'd finally turned 15. It was finally my chance to go on this trip. And, I was excited for that. Unfortunately, though, the pelagic company that we were going to go out with had recently sold all their boats and was in transition with, different boats. So they didn't have boats to run the usual trips. And I remember being so disappointed because I'd wanted to do this for so long and then I wasn't going to be able to and everything like that. Thankfully, though, the following year, they had just gotten brand new boats and were able to run the usual winter trips. With my Sweet 16 coming up, I was able to convince my mom to let me go on a 14-hour trip as opposed to the 8 that she had originally agreed to. Most girls for their Sweet 16 want a big party, but me, I wanted to go miles out in the ocean in the middle of winter to look for the pelagic birds. So once again, I was very excited because this was going on and I was starting to prepare for it. And that's one thing, is the fun and excitement doesn't begin when the actual trip begins for me. It begins with the studying of the birds that I might see, the planning, the prepping, all of that stuff. And the fun and excitement doesn't end when the actual trip ends either, because then I get to go home and, being a vlogger and a photographer, go sort through and edit all of my photos and videos from the day. Anyway, the trip was coming up and I was very excited. Unfortunately, though, I got an email a few days before saying that the trip was canceled. So once again, I was very disappointed because I hadn't been able to go out the previous year, and now it didn't look like I was going to be going out this year either. A few days afterwards, though, I got another email, this time an exciting one, saying that the pelagic trip was scheduled to go out a few weeks later. So once again, I was very excited. And finally, the day came, and I had to get up at 3 a.m. to be down by the dock for 4:20, which was around when the boat was going out. And I wasn't even tired, even though I only slept for a few hours, and that's how I feel on all my birding trips. It was still blackout as we were heading out on the boat, and you couldn't see anything. After a few hours, though, the sun was coming up, and I was starting to get lifers. I was able to get 4 lifers, that being common murre, Atlantic puffin, black-legged kittiwake, and dovekey. And dovekey was one of my top target birds for this trip, and I was expecting just to get a few of them, but we wound up getting 328 of them, and truly by the afternoon, most people had stopped looking for them, and the boat had stopped slowing down unless there was a really close one. And aside from the lifers, I was able to get some other cool birds too. I'm trying to think. So we got glaucous gull, Iceland gull, and of course, the bird that started my whole obsession with seabirding, the razorbill. When most people think of birding, they don't think it can be this fun or extreme, but it can be, and that's another thing that I love about it. All of these adventures has led me to where I am now, which is ready for even more exciting adventures and wanting to capture them all with my camera, to take it all in and to show people all of these amazing things. I've currently been working on improving my photography, chasing rare birds, and taking some online bird identification courses, especially shorebirds. With COVID and social distancing, it's forcing me to rely on my own birding skills, because if there's a bird that I want to see that I'm really bad at identifying, I'm not really birding with people, so my only chance of seeing it is my ID skills. In conclusion to all of this, birding in nature has just become so much more than a hobby for me. It has become such a large part of my life and has given me so much happiness. With that in mind, I'm planning on majoring in photography in college and hope to become a professional photographer specializing in birds.
Emma, thank you very much. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
So I got a lot of questions, and I think we have some questions from the audience too. And again, I want to remind everybody in the audience, if you click the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and you would like to ask Emma a question, now's the time to do it. We'll have people standing by ready to send me the questions. I see we have one or two already, but I have some for you. You mentioned that you saw 350 some species on that pelagic trip.
Oh, not species. That was one specific
just individuals, right? But I guess my question is, how many life species have you seen now in your life, in your 16 years?
I've seen roughly 342, I think. Wow. I think so. I got a few lifers recently, so I don't know if I'm at 342 or 343, but somewhere in that area.
Now, I'm not an expert, but that sounds like quite a lot. Are most of those species in the Northeast region, or is that all over the country, or is that?
That's largely pretty much all New Jersey birds, honestly.
Wow.
With a few from New York, Delaware, and Massachusetts, but pretty much largely all New Jersey.
That is so cool. Do you have any idea of what proportion of the total that might be, of the total species?
Like of birds in general, or for New Jersey?
Birds around New Jersey, roughly. Is it like 50%?
If I'm honest, I don't really know.
Yeah, it's a difficult question, but it sounds like an awful lot. But that's fantastic. Now, the other thing that you mentioned was that you're interested in videography and photography. What is it about those two specialisms, if you like, that so interests you?
Well, I guess I love documenting things, and kind of like I was talking about in the story with the saw-whet, I love to take in everything. And photography, it allows me to take in the birds, and it also allows me, in my opinion, to spend more time with the birds, because I feel like sometimes as a birder, you just see something and then you move on. But as a photographer, to get a good picture, you have to spend more time with the birds than you necessarily would as a birder. So I like that, getting to spend more time with the birds. And as far as videography, just to take in, document the whole experience.
It's very cool. So we have a question from Jason in the audience who'd like to know, what was your favorite gull on that pelagic trip?
The glaucous gull, for sure. It was a immature glaucous gull, and it just looked so cool. It was pretty, I don't, if nobody's familiar with immature glaucous gulls, they're almost pure white. They're kind of like a creamy color, and it stayed behind the boat for probably like 3 hours and gave great views.
Wow, that sounds great. And also, Susanna in the audience wants to know, do you have a nemesis bird? Bird that gives you a lot of trouble.
My current nemesis bird for sure is northern shrike. I have chased northern shrike so many times, and each time I haven't gotten it. And I had one particularly bad chase with it a few years back where I spent hours in the car. We thought we were at the right spot, but it turns out the spot where it was being seen was an hour from where we were. And then we finally got to the spot, and somebody just said, "Oh, it just flew." Then I got home and somebody said, "Oh, it's back." So that is definitely a bad nemesis bird.
Yeah. So when you're chasing a bird, you're in touch with a lot of people, I take it.
Yeah.
Who are telling you where it is or where it might be.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's very cool. And another question from the audience, Dale wants to know about your shirt. It looks like a pileated woodpecker. Is that right?
It's actually an ivory-billed woodpecker, and it says, "I'm alive."
Okay. What's the story behind that shirt?
Well, for those of you who don't know, the ivory-billed woodpecker is a bird that many people think is extinct, but a lot of people still think is out there. And I am one of those people who really strongly believes it's out there. And so, yeah, that's kind of the story behind it. And it's one of those, it has a really interesting story because most people thought it went extinct. And then throughout the years, there's been a few sightings of it here and there that keep people wondering. And I really think for a lot of reasons that it is out there. And I really hope to see one day.
That would be fantastic, wouldn't it? It would be such a hopeful sign, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I'd love to photograph one. I'd love to be one of the first people to get pictures of it since 1935.
Yeah, I spent some time in Australia, and there were people like that who felt exactly the same way about the Tasmanian tiger, which is supposed to be extinct. But there have been several so-called sightings, and there are people just like you who want to be the first to capture it and document it in photography or on video. Scott in the audience wants to know where your favorite birding spot is in New Jersey. Can you share that?
Honestly, I can't really say I have a favorite spot because, with all the different seasons in birding, that location kind of changes, because in spring you're looking for warblers, and then the winter you're looking for waterfowl, and you're sea watching and doing all different stuff. So I honestly don't really have like one particular favorite birding location in New Jersey or really anywhere else.
I guess they're all good, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And Susanna, again, would like to ask, how do you keep in touch with other birders and find out about rare species in the area? How does that work? Can you talk about that a bit?
Yes. So the one way that I find out about rarities a lot of times is eBird. I think a lot of people are probably familiar with that, but it's a website that has different checklists and tells you different reports of what's in your area, rare or not. And I'm also on a lot of group chats on like GroupMe, if people are familiar with that app, that has a bunch of people on it, and everyone sends out different alerts that this bird was just spotted here and this bird was just spotted there. So that's kind of how I find out about a lot of the birds that I see.
Very cool. And Eric in the audience wants to know, do you have any tips that could get teens like yourself involved in birding and bird conservation?
Well, I kind of think, showing people how interesting nature can be. And I also think not so much about getting people like converting everyone to be birders, but I think it's important to show people that even if you're not a birder, how important it is to preserve nature and these different natural areas.
Do you feel, I mean, this is a follow-up to that question, to Susanna's question, but I mean, do you feel that there is a sense of concern amongst people your age about what's happening to the environment? Or do you feel that people are paying attention or not?
I feel like a lot of my friends, I'm friends with a lot of birders, and all my friends who are birders are, concerned about the environment and want to help it. But I don't know, I feel like for the most part, people, I don't know, I could kind of see it like maybe a little bit of both, that like some people are concerned and some people just don't care.
Right. But if you were suddenly tomorrow taken on as a New Jersey Audubon consultant, what would you say to New Jersey Audubon? So what should they do to get young people like yourself involved in birding and indeed in the natural spaces generally and our habitats?
To be honest, I'm not really sure, but I think just to show people that nature is interesting and that it's worth preserving.
Yeah.
I don't really know like how quite to do that, but that's just kind of my opinion.
Well, I think that's actually, personally, I think that's a very good answer, because I think when you show people stuff, particularly if they've not seen it before, it's really, it can literally be eye-opening, right? I mean, they can see things in a way that they might not have appreciated before. So I think demonstration's good.
Yeah, and I guess another thing is to also help people like Young Birders Club and maybe even some older, like young adults and stuff, to show them, how interesting birding is, but also to help those who are already interested in birding to continue to help like feed that interest and continue teaching them and showing them stuff, kind of like with like the Young Birders Club. Right,
absolutely. Jason in the audience wants to know, are you considering a biology degree when you go to college?
As of now, probably not. I'm planning on majoring in photography and maybe a minor in cinematography, depending on where I go to college.
Very cool, very cool. And Chip wants to know, what's your all-time favorite bird? You may have answered this or not, I don't know, but all-time favorite.
I don't really have like an all-time favorite bird, but I have my four favorites, and those are the pileated woodpecker, the razorbill, the northern saw-whet owl, and the ivory-billed woodpecker.
The ivory-billed, okay. This is an interesting question from Michelle in the audience, and it's kind of related to what I just asked a few moments ago, or somebody asked a few moments ago. But when you think about young kids and getting them started, and we talked, as I say, a little bit about that, what kind of resources do you think young kids could use? What did you find useful when you were young, when you were just getting started?
The Young Birders Club really helped. Going on different field trips and reading a lot and looking through field guides.
Right.
Kind of say.
What's the best field guide, do you think?
I don't really have a favorite. I have a whole bunch, as you can see on my shelf. I have pretty much every birding field guide there is, and I think they're all interesting, and they all have something that the other field guides don't have.
Right, interesting, okay. And there are two other questions here from two different people, basically asking the same question, kind of. What's your next target bird? And the other question was, what's the next bird on your bucket list?
Okay, so the ivory-billed woodpecker is definitely on there. Right. And also this one's definitely one of my hardest goal birds yet, but my current more realistic one is the great gray owl.
Okay, very nice. And I mentioned this before, but tell us about mothing.
So
why is that so cool?
I don't know. I kind of find, so some of my friends have done mothing and have kind of helped me get into that. And basically what mothing is you set up a sheet with a black light aimed at the sheet, and black lights work best because something about the wavelengths attract the moths. So you set that up, and then you just wait for the moths to come and land on there once it gets dark out. And I don't know, it's just kind of something fun to do. And it's fun to do in the summer when, it's not migration, and the birds that are here are off taking care of their young. So there's just not as many birds around. It's kind of, I don't want to say like a filler, but just kind of another part of nature that's interesting when I'm not birding.
So I've got to ask, birding during the day, probably during the night sometimes as well, mothing at night, do you ever get any sleep?
Yeah. Usually it's not like I bird and then I moth. Usually it's kind of split up.
How easy is it to identify moths that way?
It can be pretty hard, especially this was my first year ever doing it. So a lot of times what I do is I just take pictures of them, and then I either look in moth field guides or I go on the computer and start researching the different types of moths. But a lot of moths I don't really know off the top of my head just yet.
All right. So I have one final question for you, which is, you've talked a little bit about college, but if you can project forward 10 years, what would you like to be doing? Where do you see yourself in 10 years? What kind of job or what kind of things would you like to be doing?
Honestly, like I don't even know where I'm going to college yet. And if you had asked me 10 years ago what I would be doing in 10 years, I never would have guessed that I would be where I am now. So I don't really quite know what I'm going to be doing. I hope to be a professional bird photographer and continuing to do what I love, but I don't really know just yet.
Right, well, that's fair enough. You're still very young, so that's fair enough. But I'm sure you're going to be very successful at whatever you do. You are a very dynamic young woman, and it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Sadly, folks, it looks as though our time this evening is drawing to a close. I want to thank everybody in the audience for sitting around this sort of virtual campfire that we have on That's Wild and listening to Emma's stories. Emma Price, you are a real inspiration to us all. Thank you very much. If there were, I appreciate that. If all the young folks were like you, I mean, our natural spaces would be in very good hands. I'm certain of that. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. Everybody else, good night. Thank you very much again for being here. Stay safe, stay well, stay wild. Thank you very much for having me. Of course, it's been a pleasure. Thanks, everyone. Good night. Thanks for listening, everyone. Good night. Bye.